Hi, my name is Poon. I'm an independent human rights researcher based in Hong Kong. The situation here is getting really nervous, I do really hope that there will be continuous international attention on the human rights situation here in Hong Kong, and also the diminishing space for free expression here in Hong Kong. As you may have already seen the recent news about the series of arrests of young protesters and young people who are accused of violating the so-called national security law. Since the law was forcibly enforced by the Hong Kong authorities following Beijing's influence by the National People's Congress Standing Committee, the atmosphere in Hong Kong is getting more and more intense. We also see lawyers also feel very frustrated about how the courts in Hong Kong becoming more and more fragile. We used to be quite proud of our rule of law system here in Hong Kong, although we don't have democracy. But even now we see there are signs that the judiciary is not as independent as we used to have. So there are many difficulties now we are facing. So we do hope that there will be more attention on Hong Kong and continuous attention on Hong Kong's situation. And then we also feel like for young people in Hong Kong, they need to have more support. As you can see in the case of the 12 youth who risked their lives, risked their own freedom to try to flee to Taiwan because they were charged with unreasonable offenses for their participation in the anti-extradition bill in 2019. Because of the draconian laws that restrict our freedom of expression and freedom of assembly, they had to flee Hong Kong to try to continue their fight in Taiwan. But we saw that they were unfortunately caught by the police from mainland China, and they're now accused of crossing national border. And we actually also see the news how they were not allowed to meet their lawyers. The lawyers hired by their own family, which is very common practice faced by mainland dissidents. Their family members cannot meet them when they're detained, and also the lawyers hired by their family are also not allowed to meet them in detention. So they're very vulnerable to potential risk of torture and other ill treatment, as we see in many other cases of human rights defenders in China. So we call for the international community to put more pressure on China to help to save the 12 Hong Kong youths. And hopefully they can return to Hong Kong soon. I do believe that it can happen if we have gathered enough international pressure. And we also see that for the international community, it's really helpful if we continue to have dialogue among the international community on what different strategies we can use to help the 12 youths, and also to have continued pressure on the Hong Kong and the Chinese government. We see like how the Hong Kong government and the Chinese government been defying the obligations stated in the Hong Kong Basic Law, and also the Sino-British Joint Declaration. So it can only be possible for us to maintain our freedom and continue our fight for democracy if we can push the Chinese government and the Hong Kong government to respect their obligations under the Sino-British Joint Declaration and the requirements in the Hong Kong Basic Law. And very often you can hear like how the Chinese and the Hong Kong government accuse opposition leaders in Hong Kong and also protesters and also legislators in Hong Kong for violating the Hong Kong Basic Law. But actually what we see very often is the Chinese government and Hong Kong government defying requirements in the Hong Kong Basic Law. And the most recent worrying development, as you also know, in the past few days is that about the disqualification of the 4 pro-democracy legislators. We don't see any legitimate reason for disqualifying them, because the definition about national security is so broad and vague. It's arbitrarily defined by the Chinese and Hong Kong government. So it's very difficult to see how national security can be explained in the way that the Hong Kong and the Chinese government been trying to convey, which can be in compliance with the international standards. So we call for international community for more attention on the impact on the legislature and our freedom to elect our representatives here in Hong Kong. And sadly, we see the other 15 pro-democracy legislators, they had no choice but had to leave the legislature to protest against the decision by the Beijing and Hong Kong government to disqualify the 4 pro-democracy legislators. I do respect their decision, and it's a very brave decision, because it also means that they would also face a lot of pressure by the government, and also the pro-democracy camp would also feel like more difficult to continue their fight for democracy in Hong Kong. So it's now a very critical moment for us here in Hong Kong. We do hope that there will be more international support for us. Thank you very much.